In this video, we're going to be talking about SP2 hybridized atoms. So an example with carbon is given here, so CH2CH2. If we drew out the Lewis structure for this, we would find that we would get this type of structure. And what is going to be important for this is the number of atoms that are attached. So if we're taking a look at the carbon itself, let's just say this one on the left, this one is only attached to a hydrogen, another hydrogen, and a carbon. So there are only 3 atoms that are attached, so therefore it only needs 3 hybridized orbitals to make those attachments. This second bond here is going to be made from a different type of orbital overlapping. So the same thing happens with this carbon on the right. It has 3 atoms attached, so it's only going to need 3 hybridized orbitals. If we take a look at what this means for hybridization, this would mean that it would be SP2 hybridized. So we would be taking one S and 2 of the P's to make 3 total SP2 orbitals and 1 leftover P orbital. So visually, we're taking one of these S orbitals, overlapping with 2 P orbitals to get the 3 total SP2 orbitals, and then we're going to just have one of these P orbitals that's going to be left over. With these orbitals, we are still going to want all of them to be as far apart as possible. So with only the 3 sp2 orbitals making those bonds, they're going to want to orient themselves as far away from each other as they can. And the farthest we can get 3 things coming off of the same point is going to be 120 degrees. And so these are going to make a trigonal shape, which has 120 degrees between each of these orbitals. That's a larger distance than we were able to get with the tetrahedral shape, and that makes sense because we are only making sure that 3 orbitals are going to have to be as far apart as possible. The last orbital, that unhybridized p orbital that doesn't get incorporated into that hybridization process but is still going to be important, this one is going to orient itself completely 90 degrees to any of these orbitals. So what this means for this diagram, if we drew all of these in the plane of the page, that means that coming out of the page will be this part of the p orbital, and the other part of the p orbital will be going back into the page. So this whole thing is one orbital, but remember that the p orbital does have 2 different phases and are on either side of the nucleus. So in our diagram, if we're trying to figure out what the orbitals look like for this molecule, we're going to have 2 carbons that look like this, and so we're going to combine them together on our diagram. So we're going to use this structure as a kind of template for where we're going to be putting in the orbitals. We are going to have 3 sp2 orbitals around each carbon to distribute. So let's draw one of them up here to that hydrogen, one of them down here going towards the other hydrogen, one of them going towards the carbon. That's going to be making that one of the bonds between the 2 carbons. We can do that with the sp2 orbitals on this other carbon atom too. It has one that's going to be going towards the carbon on the left. It's going to have one going towards the hydrogen, and it's going to have one going towards the other hydrogen. So those are all our sp2 orbitals. If we want, we can label them before we forget what they are. So sp2, each carbon atom has 3 of them, and they're oriented in a trigonal fashion. For the H's, we can deal with them now if we want because it's going to be the same situation that we had with the sp3 hybridization. The H's can only use their s orbitals, so we're just going to go ahead and draw in the s orbitals for each of those. So let's just label those. Those are all just our s orbitals from our hydrogens, and they're overlapping to make those sigma bonds. The last thing we have to take into consideration is our p orbital. So they're not hybridized. They're going to be, so the one on the left is going to be sticking up out of the page on one side, and then it's going to be going into the page on the other side. Same thing is going to happen with the carbon on the right. It's going to have its p orbital in the exact same orientation. And what's going to happen with these, because they're in the same orientation, these p orbitals can actually overlap. So they're going to overlap up here, and these bottom parts are also going to overlap. And because they're overlapping in that side to side type fashion, that's a different type of overlap. It's made from a different type of orbital. So this is actually called a pi bond. And that's from overlapping p orbitals. So that's referring to both of those lines are just showing the overlap. So that's not two different bonds. That's just one pi bond overlapping on both sides above and below the carbon atom. We still have our sigma bonds. We have a sigma bond between the hydrogen and one of the sp2 orbitals of the carbon. We have a sigma bond at the bottom there, sigma bond. Anytime the s orbital overlaps with the sp2 orbital, that's a sigma bond. And also two hybridized orbitals overlapping, that's a sigma bond as well. So what this means for our double bonds, we have for this molecule, each of those hydrogens are bound by a sigma bond to the carbon. We have one of these two bonds in the double bond as a sigma bond, and the other one is a pi bond. So it's a different type of bond because it's being made from two overlapping p orbitals, and they overlap side to side instead of this overlap that's happening with the other orbitals, the hybridized and the s orbitals, they are overlapping head to head. So it's a different type of overlap, and it's actually head to head. You get a little bit more overlap here. It's a little bit stronger of a bond. So sigma bonds are stronger than pi bonds themselves. So just because of the type of overlap, and that's going to be something that's going to be important for when we talk about reactions as well. So that's how we would draw this particular molecule, all of the orbitals, knowing that those carbon atoms are sp2 hybridized.